Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, the FAA is well into implementation of NextGen. Wouldn't it seem inherent, given that this new private entity would have to coordinate with the remains of FAA, that that process of separation, when we are well into this, would in of itself cause some delays? I mean, you're talking about
I
liberating.
do not believe so.
And,
no.
and what basis do you have for believing it wouldn't cause?
Because those improvements will continue on to the new entity, but the new entity will be freed from all the bureaucratic and lengthy processes, procurement processes, which still plague the process. When you talk about next-gen improvements, they have been going on for 30 years. So if we were to say, oh, let's wait and let's get this project finished, which is what we have been saying for 30 years.
Well, we have the airlines themselves have only equipped 20% of their flight equipment. So is that the FAA's fault, or is that the airlines? Because the airlines are going to have a bigger seat at the table under this proposal, and you would not
They're
have
not.
wanted.
They're not having a larger seat. They have 2 out of 13. It's not a larger seat.
The public, I have to tell you, the public is not very convinced right now. If you had been sitting in this chamber, in this room,
I understand that very. I understand
not very
that.
long ago, the public is highly suspicious of removing and having a separate entity. And I will tell you that because I'm hearing that at home. I hear no clamor at home saying, gee, let's put this in a private separate entity. The issues you're addressing are ones of needing to streamline, improve procurement, and frankly have consistent funding. That is a matter of whether Congress functions, and I would say with all due respect, that is a function of the majority which is controlling funding to do appropriate funding. And that's an imperative, that's a political imperative. So to say we're just going to take it out and form a new entity, because we, frankly, and we now have a single party in control of all branches, that we can't agree on how to appropriately fund the FAA gives me concern. I was in California visiting my mother last week who has Alzheimer's. I was meeting with folks in Silicon Valley and elsewhere who are concerned that this effort to bifurcate FAA is going to, on top of things, mean it is likely to get underfunded, continue to be underfunded, at the same time that we have important initiatives on UAS, on drones, and on commercial spaceflight, in part because the commercial space entity is essential for internet connectivity for this country. Now, my concern is now we're looking to further undermine support for appropriate funding for FAA. So I am curious as to how we make this case that there's going to be political pressure and commitment by this administration to appropriately fund the FAA for these additional new initiatives, while at the same time ensuring safety, when in fact, you know, now we're talking about pulling it apart with, as my colleagues have already noted, massive assets. They may be aged, but they're still massive assets that were funded by the taxpayers.
People may not understand about the people complain all the time, passengers complain all the time about congestions and delays. That is something that people understand. This piecemeal effort to streamline, as you mentioned, to make things better, it is highly questionable as to whether it will succeed or not when the entity that is in question still remains under the constraints of the federal government and all of its rules.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Davis is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Chao, thanks for joining.